European level, but also at global level. Then we also had Orion, this European funded project on open science. We had our brother project, let's call it, which is also on science shops, and it's called Ski Shops. And they talked about different models of science shops in Europe. We also had a webinar on innovative public engagement methodologies by the University of Amsterdam and Florence. We also had universities in Belfast talking to us about education and community engaged education and policy in science shops. We also had webinars on open access and so on and so on. So we have had time already to talk about different issues, all related always with the relationship between science and society. Today we had 124 registered people, so we will see how the number of participants now, I guess, will increase during the session. And this session will be, we will have a presenter today. I'm not going to say still the name, you already know because you were invited, so you saw. But Marina will present her right now. I just introduce you some technical aspects, just the program. We will have the presentation for around 30 or 40 minutes, and then the rest of the time for questions and discussion. So you can put your questions on the chat, and we will keep on giving you the floor to present your question. We would like to ask you to switch off your cameras during the webinar, because if we are a lot of people, perhaps it will be better for our connections, and to switch off your microphones as well. And we will be able to switch them on during the question and answer when you have to ask a question or comment anything you would like to comment. We would also like to remind you that we are going to record. Actually, we are already recording. And so we will share this webinar afterwards on the website. And that's it from my side. So I give the floor to my colleague, Marina Pino, also from the Living Lab, Tirsicasa, and from the InSPIRES project, who will present our speaker. And we hope you enjoy the interesting talk that she has prepared for us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rosina, and hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to have you all on this webinar. So as you may know, in today's webinar, we have Alexandra Albert. She's a social researcher based in the Extreme Citizen Science Research Group in the Geography Department at University College London. She's currently a postdoctoral researcher on the Medical Research Council, which is funded by ACT Early UK Preventative Research Partnership, examining citizen science and co-production in health, comparing approaches in Tower Hamlets and Bradford. Prior to being in ACT Early, she worked in a Horizon 2020 project, which is called Doing It Together Science, where she helped in the organization and delivering citizen science activities across Europe. Last year, she completed her PhD in citizen social science, taking a critical investigatory approach to the practices and processes of citizen social science. And finally, her research interests include citizen science, participatory inventive methods, public sociology, and inclusive development. So, as you may know, in today's presentation, Alexandra will explore the differences and similarities in different approaches of citizen science. So that is citizen science, citizen social science, and extreme citizen science. She will present these approaches in a theoretical way and will reflect also around their benefits. Afterwards, she will present us some practical examples of how they have played out in practice, with a particular focus on the context of public health. Lastly, the webinar will seek to discuss how all of these approaches that Alexandra will present us today respond to civil society organizations and other stakeholders. So now, Alexandra, it's your turn. The floor is yours.
Thanks. Thanks so much, Marina. Can everyone hear me all right? And can everyone see the slides? Marina's nodding, so I'm hoping that's okay. But yeah, so I'm going to talk about the many practices of citizen science. So citizen science, extreme citizen science, citizen social science, and kind of put them into a context of public health for the project ACT Early that I'm currently working on. So I've kind of split the presentation into two parts, kind of theory at the beginning and then more of a practical approach afterwards. Just because I think that there's lots of really interesting work going on in both areas right now. And so the classic kind of paradigm in citizen science is kind of studying it or kind of doing it. And I think it's always interesting and useful to ask if there's something kind of beyond this. It's worth stating that I'm a social scientist by background, so these questions are kind of really relevant to me. And also kind of theory, I wanted to bring in theory because I think it's important, because in social sciences there are many competing epistemologies and kind of different ways of producing knowledge, which is not necessarily so obvious in the natural sciences or in engineering. So I wanted to also think through in this presentation the role of the researcher in relation to citizen science, and the way that kind of being immersed in a practice allows us to do something different and to see citizen science in a different way. Okay, so just starting with some literature in citizen science. The current literature seems to highlight how many different kind of terms and practices are used, and which all come under the same banner of citizen science. So Eitzel and colleagues have kind of highlighted or drawn our attention to the importance of terminology in citizen science, and especially considering the kind of increasingly international, multicultural, multidisciplinary, and also multilingual interest in citizen science. And I think it's interesting to note the kind of resistance to pinning down a narrow definition of citizen science, because of the risk of it being kind of exclusionary. A narrow definition risks not capturing the kind of considerable variety of kind of practices and approaches in the field of citizen science. So there are some interesting approaches that try to capture kind of diversity within the field. Kasparowski and Cullenberg talk about the many modes of doing citizen science in their special issue in Science and Technology Studies. There's also the recent work by Muki Hackley and colleagues at the European Citizen Science Association, so EXA, around describing the characteristics of citizen science. So they did a project where they asked lots of people to categorize different types of projects according to different characteristics in citizen science. And kind of prior to this work, citizen science was broadly kind of classified into two main strands. So a kind of more democratic citizen science around the responsibility of science to society. This approach is often associated with the work of Alan Irwin around scientific citizenship, where people affected by the consequences of science and technology demand a say in decision making. And then there's this kind of other approach to citizen science, kind of associated with Rick Bunny, which had a different standpoint around describing research that relied on volunteer observations of kind of wildlife. It's often, or this type of citizen science is often initiated by professional scientists who kind of define research questions and protocols for data collection. So then thinking about what's extreme citizen science, that was the second kind of type of citizen science that I'd referred to. So the first point on the slide is the way that our research group at UCL, Excites, kind of understands this approach. So extreme citizen science is a bottom-up situated practice that takes into account local needs, practices, and culture, and works with broad networks of people to design and build knowledge creation processes that can transform the world. So in this sense, the kind of opening part of that kind of definition, or that approach, is around the kind of process and the context of it. And then the term kind of broad networks and the knowledge creation processes. This part kind of focuses on the more democratic version of citizen science, where all knowledge is respected. And broad networks as a term kind of seeks to address the power imbalances and the need to work with intermediaries that will remain kind of in place after we're gone. And then the last part around kind of transform refers to the kind of action research that's entailed in extreme citizen science. So the idea behind extreme citizen science is that it's kind of pushing the boundaries and moving beyond the extremes. The challenge is to produce tools and methodologies that enable any user, regardless of their education, their literacy level, to understand local conditions and develop appropriate responses to them. And some examples of extreme citizen science include the InSPIRES project that's currently being undertaken by colleagues in InSPIRES. So it stands for Extreme Citizen Science Analysis and Visualization. And there's a link in the slide to find out a bit more about it. But also another example that's relevant here is Public Lab and their work. And I think they're a really interesting example because they kind of frame access to knowledge as a fundamental human right, where the best ideas and solutions come from collaborations between on-the-ground communities with deep knowledge of local issues in close, equitable and sustainable partnerships with networks that bring skills, capacity, science and technology to bear. And then another example as well, which I think is quite interesting because it's slightly different, is around DIY bio. So this is an example of a bottom-up practice, but one that requires high levels of skills and knowledge to run a viable life science project. So it's extreme in its kind of bottom-up, in its bottom-upness and the control that participants have over the project, but it involves highly educated participants. And so this is a really useful, I think this is a useful slide to kind of distinguish between the three kind of, or different types of citizen science. But so there's at the top level, there's classic science. So this is a common perception of science and scientists that we refer to. So in this type of science, it's usually carried out by scientists with high levels of education, usually a PhD, and who work at a university or a laboratory. And they define the research questions and they answer them with scientific methods. And this science can be applied to solving specific issues, and it can lead to the publication of potentially an academic paper. So then in the kind of middle, shape, there's citizen science. So classic science becomes more open through the participation and engagement of the public in doing scientific tasks. And participants help scientists to resolve research questions through data collection or through kind of classifications on a website. And more rarely, they might be involved in kind of visualization or basic analysis. And this citizen science can be used to solve societal problems or also to explore fundamental scientific questions. And then there's the kind of bigger, lighter blue shape of extreme citizen science. And the idea is that this extreme citizen science kind of extends citizen science further. And it proposes that all people, even with low levels of literacy, can be involved in the whole scientific process by defining problems, collaborating on data collection, and then using the results to solve local problems. And this can include the help of scientists, but the scientists are helping the participants in contrast to the kind of other processes. So then we move on to citizen social science, the third type that I highlighted. So citizen social science is an emerging practice in the field of citizen science, and it involves engaging citizens as collaborators in conducting social research. So I've included on the slide here some different ways that citizen social science is being theorized. So firstly, it's kind of people gathering data about the world they observe around them, or as Proctor and others note, it's around recording data at volume. So there's this idea of kind of scalability. And then Housley and others suggest that citizen social science can forge a new relationship between the social science academy and society. And another kind of interesting approach to citizen social science that's being developed at the moment is around a form of kind of participatory evaluation, both in the social sciences, but also using it as a way to evaluate citizen science itself. And then lastly, there's another angle that I think is really interesting from kind of science and technology studies perspective, which is around the social life of methods. So this approach sees questions of method as raising fundamental theoretical questions about the limits of knowledge itself, and reflects on new ways of understanding the relationship between the cultural, social, and material. So how we do research, what research is, what its role and impact in society is, these are all kind of enacted through methods. And then citizen social science can be seen as a kind of way in which to reflect on our methods and to kind of improve them. So what I find is that one of the challenges with citizen social science is that it tends to generate a lot of different questions. So is it a form of kind of citizen science in the social sciences? Is it an epistemologically distinct approach? And also, what are the benefits of framing it as citizen social science? So I'd argue that it allows for greater levels of reflexivity in undertaking participatory research. Taking a kind of feminist epistemological approach, it's an opportunity for sharing personal truths and acknowledging what Donna Haraway would call different situated knowledges. And also Jasnoff refers to the calls for the supplementation of science with the experiential, with personal truths and modes of knowing that are often pushed aside in expanding scientific understanding and technological capacity. So I think that citizen social science raises important questions about method, but in the social sciences, there are quite a few participatory methods that have been around. For some time. So there's co-production, which has a particular legacy in health research. And then there's also this approach of participatory action research, which draws on a kind of model of community organizing that supports the capacity and expertise of people experiencing issues firsthand. So participatory action research in many ways is a kind of research style or an orientation to inquiry rather than a method necessarily or a kind of procedure for research. And it involves a series of commitments to observe and sort of problematize through practice a series of principles for conducting social research. I also think, participatory action research questions the power dynamics in the research process. And it challenges not only the status of the researchers as experts, but also creates spaces of reflexivity around how knowledge is generated and produced. So yeah, there are lots of different questions and challenges that citizen social science raises. And another crucial one is actually around the kind of issues of objectivity and subjectivity in the research process. So this idea of kind of built-in detachment from the process is kind of very much blurred in citizen social science as people are engaged in kind of doing it. So I'm now gonna, so those are kind of, I've discussed a bit of the theorizing of these different approaches. And now I kind of wanted to look at how some of them play out in practice, and also to consider this question around how these approaches respond to civil society organizations and other stakeholders. So I wanted to draw your attention to some interesting examples of citizen social science. One is a kind of early example of citizen social science and kind of participatory ethnography called the Mass Observation Project. It was set up in 1937 as a way of recording kind of wartime Britain and recording people's experiences of everyday life. So volunteer observers, mass observers as they were called, they would send in their accounts of their day or practices in their home or different issues. And the project has taken a slightly different form, but it still continues today. So now there's a panel of kind of volunteer observers, and they're sent open-ended questions, or what are called directives, 3 times a year on a wide variety of different topics. And they send in their written responses to the archive, which holds them as a kind of rich database that anyone can consult. And I thought it was particularly interesting over the past sort of 6 months, this approach to kind of day diaries or kind of video diaries has become very popular again as a way to collect people's experiences of lockdown. During COVID. Other examples that I was thinking about of citizen social science is the work of Mapping for Change. Their kind of community asset mapping approach is arguably a form of citizen social science. But the main issue here that I think is quite interesting is that there are many projects that could be considered to be doing citizen social science in practice, but they don't necessarily use that term, and they don't consider it to be that necessarily. They're just doing it. So 2 other case studies that I wanted to focus on. One is the Doing It Together Science project. So this was a Horizon 2020 funded coordination and support action that ended last year, in 2019. And DITA's kind of promoted the idea that by doing science together, we can combine our resources and expertise to raise awareness, build capacity, and develop innovative, lasting solutions kind of grounded in society. And DITA sought to move from a model of kind of scientific research, innovation, and problem solving, mainly driven by scientific institutions, to one based on a kind of active public participation in the research process. And then the other case study that I'll go into in a bit more detail is Act Early, which is where the project that I'm currently working on, that my postdoc's on. So Act Early is a preventative research program. It builds on city test beds to support the kind of identification, implementation, and evaluation of upstream early life interventions within a whole system setting. So as an initiative, Act Early brings together a wide-ranging consortium of researchers, policymakers, and communities from Bradford in the north of the UK and Tower Hamlets in East London to develop innovative interventions to improve population health. And the vision of Act Early is kind of to promote a fairer, healthier future for children living in deprived areas through a focus on improving the environments that influence health in the broadest sense, and enhancing life opportunities in 3 key areas. So around healthy places, healthy learning, and healthy livelihoods. So I just wanted to show really quickly, I'm sure some of you are familiar with this model, the escalator model that came out of the DITA's project. So the idea is that we can think of the escalator as a way to view different ways of engaging with science. And this is science kind of with and for society, and the opportunities that citizen science provides. I'm not going to spend too long on it. And so just going to focus more on Act Early. Act Early is kind of is committed to genuine co-production with its users in order to achieve sustainable interventions with real impact. As I said just before, there's a broad range of stakeholders and members of the consortium. And the idea is to use citizen science methods of community engagement and community asset-based approaches to sustainable community-driven change. And interestingly, like one of the issues, again, is around terminology here. So one of the first things that I've been doing on the project is to kind of develop a positioning paper to kind of explore these different types of terminology, different terms, so co-production, citizen science, and to develop a shared understanding of our approaches in the context of Act Early to kind of ensure that we're all on the same page. So more specifically, within the London site of Act Early, I've been working really closely with the Bromley by Bow Centre and their team of community researchers. So the Bromley by Bow Centre is a pioneering charity based in Tower Hamlets in East London. And it's both a charity and also a kind of health GP practice. And they're kind of really pioneering the use of social prescribing. So the community research team came into post in early March. And so after kind of running a series of kind of training activities and things, then lockdown was announced in the UK, in London, on the 23rd of March. So we suddenly had to completely adapt and transform our kind of community engagement processes and practices. So one of the first things that we did as a community research team was to develop a new platform called Family Playrooms to kind of continue to build relationships with the community. And the image on the right-hand side is a kind of is related to the family playrooms. So there was the idea of having different activities in different rooms in the house, but these were all done online. And then the team also partnered with local organisations to deliver kind of tangible outputs like play packs. So they did some around the theme of Summer by the Sea, and then further kind of online content. And one of the overarching kind of principles in all our work was to try to introduce a sense of kind of fun and friendliness into the activities and ensure that conversations were as accessible and kind of relevant as possible. And also to have this kind of sense of reflecting on and learning from our process. So some of the more specific aspects of our work was the kind of have your say, which was a kind of short survey of questions around what people were doing to maintain kind of happy and healthy children. So far, we've engaged with 563 households across the borough of Tower Hamlets in East London, and we've got around 350 pieces of data, but in kind of very different forms and varying depth and quality. So there's also a kind of more formal survey using Bradford's Community Priorities Survey. Some of the community researchers have also been doing a podcast to kind of share local tips and wisdom and expertise on a range of topics. Another kind of piece of their work was also called Burdette Bunting. So they developed some bunting, like kind of triangular pieces of paper kind of strung together in different locations across the borough that people could write their responses on to the question, what would you like to see in Burdette, in this area, so our children are happy and healthy. And then another part of the work was also to collaborate with a local artist and to develop a kind of model village around the saying, it takes a whole village to raise a child. And we did kind of quite a few pop-up workshops in parks around the borough over the summer. So the next steps for the work with the community research team include trying to focus on working with groups who aren't well represented in the discussions that have already taken place. So that's specific areas of the borough, but also groups of people like carers and others who haven't kind of responded so far. There's also plans to have an exhibition around the It Takes a Village work. And then a kind of key part is also trying to record the processes and kind of what we've done and the decisions that we've made and what we've learned from these approaches. And then lastly, we're starting to try to analyze the data. And then with the themes that are coming out of the data, we're going to try to hold conversations across the borough to discuss further. So just some more reflections on kind of citizen science in Act Early. There's a need to kind of consider the journey for both researchers and also the communities who might be new to these kind of methods and approaches. And that applies as much to people who haven't been involved in research before as it does with kind of working across different disciplines and different academic disciplines where they're not so familiar with citizen science or co-production or participatory approaches. So we've taken a stance on kind of starting with more contributory modes of citizen science as a kind of slightly easier way in to this way of doing research, and then we can start to move towards more kind of collaborative and co-created, co-produced research going forward. We've also run lots of kind of listening and training workshops for research teams. Again, this applies both to kind of other academic disciplines that aren't familiar with these approaches, as it does with the kind of community research team who are, you know, new in post as well. So also reflecting on engaging kind of different types of stakeholders through developing projects on a range of different topics. And then, yeah, we were also, again, thinking about how to document our processes and learn from them. So those were the kind of thoughts and our approach on Act Early. But these were some other projects that I think are interesting and potentially relevant. So there's COACT, which is a focus on kind of citizen social science and collective action. There's also, coming out of the recent European Citizen Science Association conference, there's soon, or there's going to be a working group focused specifically on citizen science and health. There's also an initiative at UCL that I've just come across called the Community Research Initiative for Students at UCL, which I felt like was the closest kind of initiative to a science shop that I'd come across at UCL. And then the last thing that I'd mentioned was a kind of community of practice that we're starting to develop across the different UK preventative research partnerships, because Act Early is one of 6 projects. So we're trying to, share our learning across these different projects around how we've done public engagement, and then within that kind of citizen science and co-production. So then just coming back to this question around how these approaches respond to civil society organizations and other stakeholders. I wanted to kind of, just offer some general thoughts really briefly before we have some questions. I think the role of the researcher is really interesting in these approaches, and it's often one of being a kind of translator between the different stakeholders and the different perspectives. I think that the researchers, as in this kind of translator role, are also crucial in developing kind of relational ethics and kind of working things out together across the different stakeholders. And these approaches of kind of citizen science, extreme citizen science, citizen social science can be really useful tools to facilitate the co-production of change to local environments, with the broader aim of improving health. And we've already, like certainly on the Act Early project, we've already kind of identified synergies between community needs and policy and decision makers and other user groups. So yeah, I see kind of researchers as sort of facilitators or interveners or shapers. And I think it's really interesting the way that these approaches kind of generate new responsibilities for researchers and policymakers, but also for participants, for citizens, because of the way that they start to question and kind of rearrange the power dynamics in the research process. And so just lastly, like just some thoughts that I was having in kind of developing this, this presentation. I still, have this residual question around the role of researchers in these projects. How can we support a multiplicity of practices and foster kind of cooperative relationships between the many different stakeholders in such projects? And I think from a kind of more theoretical perspective, I find science and technology studies is a really interesting way to kind of reflect or it's kind of reflexive way of practicing citizen science and citizen social science, because it kind of generates this possibility of a critique from within. So those are my thoughts. There's some references here that might be useful and of interest that I've kind of referred to throughout the presentation. And then that's some more information about me and the Excites research group. But yeah, thank you.
Thanks a lot, Alexandra, for this very interesting presentation about citizen science, extreme citizen science, but actually you talked to us about many different approaches and methodologies, public labs, do-it-yourself biology, citizen social science, participatory action research, so many different approaches, and also STS as a field of research to reflect on what we are doing and how actually all these approaches are converging, and together with science shops, of course. And now the boundaries between ones and the other ones perhaps are difficult to see, and I guess that's what makes it more interesting even. You also talked to us about change, about learning among the participants, about systemic approach, about communities of practice, and about researchers being not only researchers, but also facilitators of these multi-stakeholder processes. So this is very much in line with what we are also promoting in our project. And actually we have recently published a paper from with the first authors being from the University of Amsterdam, and then there are other authors in the consortium and also the Living Knowledge Network. And we will share the link now on the chat so you can follow as well how we see the evolution of science shops, which at the end, we guess what we are doing is just converging, as I said, with all these other movements coming from different parts in the world, and all looking for this more multi-stakeholder, more reflexive, more mutual learning, more systemic approach, more focus towards change, and so on and so on. So we are going now to open the floor to the audience. And as we already have some questions that have been posted in the chat, some of them appeared during your presentation. So perhaps the ones who posted would like to explain what they wanted to ask. So for example, Martin Legris.
Yes, hello everybody.
Hello.
I was wondering why you were telling us that you see
Martin, sorry, do you mind introducing yourself very briefly, where you are from, which institution, and then
okay.
asking?
So I'm from Lille University in France. I'm a sociologist. I'm doing participatory action research, and I'm part of a French network of science shops. And thank you for your presentation. I was wondering why you were telling us that citizen science is only a social research. Why not research?
I guess I was referring to, I was trying to kind of think about citizen social science. So that's why I was kind of locating, like as a starting point, locating citizen science in social science and kind of referring it in that way. But I mean, I think it is, and I think it should be a kind of, well, citizen science anyway should be a broad approach to doing research. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yes, it does. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you. Next question is by Git Krach. I don't know if I pronounce it correctly, sorry, but Git, are you around? Do you want to share your question with us?
I'm around, thank you very much. Yes, my name is Gita Krach. I work currently at Science at Home, based at Aarhus University, doing a range of different things from the typical kind of citizen science games to more kind of research games, and different participation approaches are used as well. So this is why we're also having the discussion about what is citizen science, what is citizen social science, and all of this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
We also engage schools in some of what we do and use citizen science approaches there. So your figure kind of surprised me a little bit, where you go like, citizen science can't happen in schools. It's extreme citizen science if it's in schools, and I'm just wondering why.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I don't think it can't happen in schools at all. I just think that it's more about, because there's loads of citizen science going on in schools, and there's loads of different approaches to doing that. I think it was more about, it's kind of involving students who are kind of at the beginning of their education journey in doing citizen science. That would be my take on it.
So for you, Alexandra, it would be that extreme citizen science is when you give the power to the citizen to conduct the research themselves. So it's not the scientist anymore, but the scientist is the student
yeah.
in that case, right?
Yeah.
So that's the reason why you call it extreme citizen science.
Yeah.
So
it's a matter of terminology, I guess.
It is, yes. But I would see more also from your definition of extreme citizen science that it's kind of coming from the extremes and bottom up. So I would say it's, if you're using the IPSA, the inquiry-based science education approach, where the kids are then coming up with the questions and then bringing that in, linking that to citizen science project, which is some of what we're going to try to do at least. That I would maybe term extreme citizen science, whereas because mostly it's researchers coming in with a project, getting the kids to do something and providing some data. I don't see that as different to like normal citizen science.
Yeah, I think it would maybe become more extreme if it was kind of asking children to come up with their own questions or their own topics that they wanted to research.
Very cool and good presentation. Thank you. Interesting questions.
Thank you, Git. You have actually another question later on the chat. Do you want to keep on? You were asking about ACT earlier.
I did. I just find it easier typing in the questions as we go. Yeah. So when you were talking about the ACT Early project, it sounded like you were out and doing all these great things in the community, and then the researchers took the data and went home and had a look at it, and then you went back out and kind of presented and discussed. I'm not sure if that's correct, but the question is, if that is correct, why did you not involve the community in looking at the data, at what they have provided you with, and what to do with it?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So we've literally just started this week to do the analysis, and I think so at the moment it's the community research team who are kind of leading on the analysis, and so that the initial thing I think is just to try and kind of make sense of the data, but then the idea is also to have more kind of public discussions within the borough. I guess the challenge at the moment is that is like how to do that, and given that it's not possible to kind of have like face-to-face workshops or kind of events. So at the moment, we're just trying to make sense of the data, and then hoping to use that as a way, like having had some key themes, to take that back to different communities and people who are interested, to start to try and have conversations about how to affect change, how to improve things. But yeah, it's a challenge at the moment.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Fabian has just shared with us the link to the website where Alexandra works, where they have a very good definition of what extreme citizen science is.
Thanks, Fabian.
And it says, brings together scholars from diverse fields to develop and contribute to the guiding theories and methodologies that will enable any community to start a citizen science project. So it seems that there are scholars in different disciplines that facilitate theories and methods to a community, and then the community start a citizen science project that will help them deal with issues that concern them. Mm-hmm. So there is an interdisciplinary research approach. Mm-hmm. What I see perhaps the difference between transdisciplinary and this approach is that in this approach, the power is given to the community. So the research community gives them the tools, the methods, the knowledge, the abilities, and then they do it. Whereas in a transdisciplinary approach, we would do it together with them, so all together. Mm-hmm. So I guess this is the difference between citizen science and extreme citizen science, right? So great. So we can see here another comment by Fleur. I don't know, Fleur, if you want to share it with us with a microphone.
I can. Hi, I am Fleur. I'm from the Netherlands, and I'm working on a Horizon 2020 project as a PhD candidate. And I thought, after seeing your lovely presentation, thank you very much for sharing your insights with us. I thought another interesting project along with this discussion, and I was hearing all the terminologies with extreme citizen science, and then we're talking about co-created citizen science and health, and yeah, and then I thought the project happens where I'm also working on is that's also currently ongoing, that I thought might be of interest for people to have a look at, is the Cities Health Consortium, which is really trying to tackle with a bottom-up approach, trying to involve citizens throughout the entire research project. So developing the hypothesis with them, including them in the design, the data analysis, and publication of results. So I thought this would also be interesting, because in this project, we're also trying to address health through environmental epidemiology and local concerns of them. So I thought it might be of interest.
Thank you.
It is indeed, Fleur. Thank you very much.
How far through is the Cities Health project?
So it started in the beginning of 2019. Uh-huh. So we're coming to the end of the second year. Mm-hmm. And yeah, with COVID, there's been quite a few complications, but it's quite interesting as well to see how we are now trying to go for a more digital approach, how to keep engagement with citizens that we're in contact with. So there's a lot of exciting things happening there. And also, yeah, I also saw there was quite a few overlap with some of the references you mentioned, and I thought it was just very interesting.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
No worries.
Thank you very much. Is there any other participant who wants to comment or ask any question? No? Okay, so we can now then be closing the session. Marina shared in the chat the link to the paper I mentioned before, where we also reflect around this evolution of models of interfaces between science and society. In this case, the evolution of science shops and how they converge to everything that we have talked today. So towards multi-stakeholder platforms, where we normally were seeing the tendency towards transdisciplinary approaches, where the researchers still are engaged, but I fully agree that extreme citizen science can also take place in many different environments where perhaps scientists are not collaborating, and it can also be an interesting approach. So
Rosina.
Yes, Andrea, hello.
Hello,
Nice to
how
see
are
you.
Nice to see you too. I just had a question, if I might.
Sure, go ahead, please.
Yes, good evening, everyone. Yes, I just wanted to ask, I'm quite keen on the issue of having citizens participating not only in designing the research projects, but also in designing what's before the research process. What I mean is that very often researchers arrive to citizens with their own projects because they got their funding already. What we're trying to develop here, and we're experimenting successfully, is to co-design to get the funding before with the citizens and with the especially with the most vulnerable citizens, excluded people, women, poor people. So this is an issue and a big issue, because the objectives, the main interest of researchers very often are not the same as the one of the excluded people, who look more at the day-by-day results rather than the long-term idea of the researcher. So in this sense, what I found useful is to try to establish long-term and permanent partnership, permanent equitable partnerships, rather than working on single projects, but rather working on wider programs with communities, like establishing living labs and things like that. So do you have any example in that sense that you might want to share with us?
Andrea, sorry to interrupt. There's somebody in the chat who asks if you can please introduce yourself.
Yes, I'm Andrea Vargiu. I'm from University of Sassari, and I coordinate the Voice Laboratory at the University of Sassari. I was partner in the PRIRIS project, some of you might know, and in the Enrich project at European level.
Thank you.
It's a really great point that you raise about the kind of what happens before, and also the kind of competing kind of research interests, but also the funding kind of constraints as well. I don't have any specific examples of kind of co-producing kind of funding applications. Although one of the things that, as a result of Act Early, it's a kind of initial consortium, but we're also trying to develop funding proposals that we've kind of developed with the center that I was talking about, Bromley by Bow Center, and with the community research team to try to support and explore other issues. So one of the big issues at the moment is around digital inclusion and kind of access to devices, but also people might have access to the internet but not actually feel confident to use different devices or to use the internet. So there's kind of different areas of work that are coming out of the initial work that we've been doing on Act Early, but we haven't got to a stage where we're kind of fully kind of co-producing funding applications. But I think it's a really, really important and really interesting area. I don't know if you have, Andre.
Yes, we do, and I would be very interested in sharing this experience with others that have these kind of experiences. I would call extreme citizen science in a way.
Yeah.
Actually, before COVID, Andrea, we were happy to meet in international events, and we had been talking about this. We also have this approach where we build communities of practice that are permanent communities of practice. And then, of course, the research agenda and the writing of the projects and everything comes up collaboratively because it's permanent. So, and you evaluate together how you perform change, and you follow all the phases, but not of a project, but within a challenge. Perhaps that's the difference, right? Project approach versus challenge approach.
Exactly.
We are going to move now to the last question. I'm sorry, but we are very short of time. So there is only one if it can be very short, please, Simon, do you want to ask your question?
Right. Sorry. Yes. My name's. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Sorry. My name's Simon Wood. I'm not an academic. I'm doing some research for a community television program for NBTV in Belfast on citizen science. And it's fascinating listening to what you're, the whole business of what you're talking about today. I thought was brilliant. One question that arose in my head was the accusation, especially say with extreme citizen science, that it's not proper science, is it? How can it be? If it's just kids doing it, or ordinary people, illiterate people, or something, how can it possibly have the same? Be up there with proper science? And in that sense, I mean, do you have peer review? Is it published? Do you define the work as being replicable? Those sorts of things that people use to define science. How does that? How do you explain that in especially extreme citizen science?
I see it more as focusing on the kind of local needs and local issues that people are facing, and then working with them to kind of find the appropriate kind of solutions or responses to those issues, whether that's through collecting different types of data or through like developing an evidence base. So I think the kind of issues of like peer-reviewed papers is something that is important to aim towards if that's what people want to do, but like the primary focus is on the issues that are being faced.
Mm-hmm. Excellent.
But then, there's also, thanks, Fabian. There's also a kind of specific citizen science journal called Citizen Science Theory and Practice, which is peer-reviewed. And that might be an interesting resource for you.
Yeah, perhaps Fabienne, you want to answer to that question about peer review of this sort of publications. And we close with that answer by Fabienne, and we move to the wrap-up. Fabienne, do you want to answer that as well?
I can try to.
Go for it.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, it's a big question that you asked, Simon. So the question is perhaps how that you should try to focus on is how you produce good or relevant knowledge, and at some point there is not big differences between what you can do in science and citizen science. It depends on which method you rely on and what issue you want to face. But it's true that of course citizen science or citizen scientists are more interested by by solving the issue that they are facing, more than answering scientific and academic questions.
Okay, so I hope that answered Simon's question. So now just finishing, because we don't want to finish too late. We know we are some minutes off already. So I leave the floor to Marina, who will do the wrap up. And I thank a lot our speaker, Alexandra, and all the participants who have made this webinar very interesting. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, so thank you very much to all of you for participating in this very fruitful webinar. We hope that it's given you a lot of valuable findings about citizen science, extreme citizen science, and lots of methodologies that Alexandra explained us today. So Alexandra, thank you for your collaboration and your presentation. It was excellent. And thank you all of you for having us today. So in a few days, you will be able to find this recording available on the InSPIRES website and in our YouTube channel. We will also send you an email with an evaluation form and also a link, so you will be able to download this presentation. So stay tuned for our future webinars, and many thanks to all of you, and hoping to see you next soon. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Good.